All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to DevRelCon Tokyo. I'm honored to be one of the keynotes for this conference, where we're going to talk about DevRel and dev marketing and breaking down silos to better serve your community. This talk has four main sections. First off, we're going to start with just what are we actually talking about with DevRel and dev marketing, since these terms can mean a lot of different things. Then we'll go over why DevRel and dev marketing should even work together. We'll then go into how we can make this happen and then what this looks like in practice by walking through a real life example of ours. Some housekeeping that I think they just mentioned. This talk is being recorded and will be posted online afterwards by the conference organizers, along with a link to the slides, which I'll provide. If you have any questions along the way, please put them into the live chat box and our MC will take care of them. So before we jump into all of that, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Carol Huang. I am a dev marketing manager at Stripe. I grew up in LA, but I live in New York City now, where, as we talked about, is a lovely, actually, was just storming earlier, but now it's a beautiful summer evening. I've been working in developer marketing or community marketing for a while. The exact term that you'll hear for this can actually vary a lot. It's a term that's pretty unique to developer products and developer tools companies. As you'll see, MongoDB, PlanetScale, Vitess, these are all kind of open source database companies. Codacy is an automated code review tool. So it's a little bit out of the ordinary in a very nice way to see that Stripe was focusing on DevRel, which is why this was an exciting opportunity for me to join the company a year ago. In case you don't know about Stripe, just a quick overview of what we do. We are a global technology company. We're headquartered in San Francisco and in Dublin, Ireland, with offices all around the world, including in Tokyo. Our goal is essentially to build the economic infrastructure of the internet with the ultimate goal of increasing the gross domestic product of the internet. Today, only 3% of GDP happens online, and we want to increase this by helping more companies get started, get into new markets, and launch new business models. We do this by building what we call the GPTN, or the Global Payments and Treasury Network. There's a lot on this slide. You don't need to read it all. If you're glancing at it, you'll probably see some things you recognize, like checkout, maybe fraud prevention, invoicing, and some things you might not, like card issuing, card readers, capital for platforms. All you really need to know is that Stripe, we are trying to make money movement as simple and borderless as the internet is by optimizing how businesses accept payments and providing financial services as they grow. In order to do that, we need to build a global developer community. This is just a map of where I at least know of Stripe developers. I am sure they're in many more places. We'd like to be all over the world, which is why we have our DevRel team. So our first part, we'll start now with defining what DevRel and dev marketing even are at Stripe. So DevRel at Stripe is actually called developer advocacy. So you may see me refer to it as DA here and there. It sits within product and engineering at Stripe, but as you all know, dev advocacy and DevRel can sit within a variety of different teams. And there's a lot of different ways we could describe what DevRel or DA teams do. So I'm going to share with you just basically what their team charter is, which is very much key to advocate for developers internally with product feedback. This is particularly important when your internal product team is not a daily user of your product, which is going to be the case unless you work at a dev product or dev tools company. The second thing is to drive adoption through content, educational, inspirational. What can you do? What can you do that you maybe have never thought of that you can do? And lastly, to engage with developers through events and outreach like conferences and meetups, both virtual and in person when that's safe to do again. What is dev marketing at Stripe? Dev marketing at Stripe actually sits on the product marketing team. At many other companies, it might sit under an events or a community team of its own, or actually sometimes even under engineering. Similarly, marketing can have a lot of different focuses because it's a very broad category. I've been on community or marketing teams that really focused almost entirely on events or enablement through education. But here at Stripe, our goals are to know our users and their needs, know our products and their features, and connect the two. I know you're looking at this and saying these goals seem pretty broad. It kind of seems like dev marketing's goals are maybe headed or just pointed in a different direction than dev advocacy goals, which is common. Like, that's a common state of things. So you might be wondering, how would these teams even work together? Well, let's go through first the current state you might be starting with, which is usually your teams are in silos. Think about the current state of your teamwork or work you might be doing with marketing or really with any other team. Think about how much you talk to each other, when you help each other, when you don't, and when you're not talking to each other, and what happens. The first thing you'll probably realize is that if you've worked together, and even if you haven't worked together, siloed teams don't have any alignment of goals. As you saw from our previous comparison of DevRel and Dev Marketing, you kind of have Dev Advocacy doing stuff over here, marketing doing stuff over here, and what is the common state of things? Well, very often, DA thinks marketing is just trying to get leads rather than help devs. This is a common and fair perception because marketing is often reviewed just based on the number of leads that you bring in. Marketing might think that DA is just trying to do what's cool to get views rather than serve users. Also a fair call. DevRel, Dev Advocacy is often glamorized for just kind of traveling around and showing people cool stuff, but we all both know that that's not really the truth. The key thing here is that neither of them thinks that the other has the best for the users in mind. Another common thing is when you're siloed, you haven't built up any trust or team building because you're just operating only in your own silos. So when marketing wants to take a step to make sure we're going down the right path with content or by going to a specific conference, DA thinks marketing is just trying to block things, is just trying to gatekeep. Whereas from marketing's point of view, these DAs are just YOLOing, they're just doing whatever they want without any research. So again, lack of trust there. But the key thing that kind of happens here is they don't ask for help when they could help each other because they don't believe the other has the user's best interest at heart. They aren't talking because they aren't working as a team, all of which leads to a poor experience for your dev and users suffering as a result. So now that this is the current state of things we've established that you might be starting with, you might be at some various, stage in that journey. How do we fix this? So if we go back to this first set of issues here, we look at it, DA thinks marketing just wants to get leads. Marketing thinks advocacy is just pursuing what's cool. There's a misalignment of goals here. So let's go into why should these two teams work together? Because, spoiler alert, our team goals are actually complementary, and I'll show you how. So if you go back and remember what our marketing goals were, the number one thing is to know our users. And if you think about this, you have to know your users in order to advocate for them internally. You need to know their needs, their wants, and their pain points so you can tell the product team what they're going through and what they need. Secondly, you need to know your products and how they work because we can't teach something we don't know. If you want to make educational content, inspirational content, you need to know your products. And lastly, of course, most importantly, you want to connect the two. You need to be able to bring the right flavor or version of your product to the right users and make sure that everyone is getting exactly what it is that they need. And we do that through dev relations, events, and outreach. And these all lead ultimately to your shared company goal of greater awareness and adoption. This is probably a company goal that a lot of you share, and it gives you a direct line in your success to the company's success. So it lets you point very clearly to how your team has contributed when it comes around to performance review time, when it comes around to QBR time. Basically, anytime you need to show that your team has been doing a lot of awesome things that have been helping the company, this lets you do that. And just a side note here, this is something that you can apply to any people or teams that you need to work with. And it's especially key in a time when you might not have even been able to meet your other teammates in person. And I'm highlighting this because it's a very possible state that you might not have a dedicated dev marketer. You might not even have a dedicated marketing person, period. But I can guarantee you that you have people with marketing skills, one or more of them that you work with, because this is an array of things like project management, like communications, copywriting, public relations, empathy, a good number of dev advocates, support engineers, program managers, project managers all have these. If you're at a larger company where roles are a little bit more scoped out, you'll also have similar teams that do many parts of what marketing does. For example, data science or user experience research teams really help you get to know your users and what they're going through. Product managers give you insight into product expertise and use cases, and event organizers can help you figure out meetups and live streams. For the sake of simplicity, and because I'm talking about my situation as a dev marketer, I'm going to talk about dev marketing as one person working within a DevRel team. But you can create a super strong relationship between DevRel and any other team as long as you recognize your shared goals and align them before you do anything. So, great. That's real conceptual. How does this work when you bring actual people in it? So let's go into how do you actually break down these silos? There's kind of two main points in this that I want to go over. Number one is to really embed and team build. And number two is to build a foundation of trust. So, embedding and team building. It's key that whoever you're embedding feels like they're a part of the team. In this case, it's me, the dev marketer, who is embedded within our dev advocacy, our DA team. So, what actually is an embedded model? You might be familiar with this term from product teams or maybe site reliability engineering teams where somebody is embedded when they organizationally sit in a different team or org or pillar, but you work together very closely on your projects possibly every day. And a lot of the times this is just an org chart thing, it might be a budget thing, but the fact is they're not technically on your team. And so in order to make this work, there's a couple things you can really do in practice. You make sure that your embedded person has everything they need to do to stay up to date on the work and to make everything successful for everybody. They're attending all the team meetings, they're participating in those daily stand-ups that a lot of us do. I meet bi-weekly and sometimes weekly with all of my team members that I can, and I'm actually a part of the private team channel and Slack. But the flip side of this, of course, is just as important, and that's the team building part. Now that we kind of know how we can make this work in practice, is really how do we team build? Because that's just as important as kind of this embedded model. One of the things that we do within my DA team is we have monthly social coffee chats. If you're familiar with working remote, this is a common thing in order to stay connected as people. We have just a few light rules so it doesn't become an actual work meeting. There's no technical talk like, did you see my Slack message? You can talk about high level things, things you might be dreaming about. And it's also just share as much about your personal life as you're comfortable and you want to. It's kind of like what you would talk about in the office on Friday before you maybe go out of town or just go out for the weekend. I think last year in particular, and definitely parts of this year, have taught us that the global environment of what's going on in our lives really cannot be divorced from work and cannot be divorced from who we are as people. The second thing that we do is we actually keep in touch through non-work channels. We use an app called Marco Polo, which allows for asynchronous video chatting with people both in Ireland and Singapore, as well as 4 states across the US. We're literally all in a different place. It's a really nice, lightweight, optional way to share parts of our days or weekends with each other. I get to see things like monkeys in Singapore and the cowboys in Texas and vineyards in California. So I think it's a pretty sweet deal. But and this is pretty key, it's also a non-work channel. This is something that's not a part of your official work computer. It's the equivalent of going for a walk with someone to grab a cup of coffee and what you might talk about then. And lastly, the most important thing is to treat your embedded team members like they're actually a part of the team when it comes to org-wide events that are meant to build community. These are things like escape rooms, offsites, team cooking classes, and often you might forget these people just because they're not on some list when you're trying to, pull everybody you need to invite. Um, it's usually not on purpose. The only resistance that I sometimes see to this relates to budget. But the same way that you shouldn't ship your org chart, as you might have heard when it comes to software development, you shouldn't team build according to your org chart either. You need to make sure these people feel like they're a real member of the team. And I'll go into a little bit why for this. If you're familiar with organizational behavior theory, the bonds formed through these kinds of activities are called weak ties. And these are just as important or sometimes more important than the strong ties of who you work with out of necessity for things like innovation, problem solving, and really all around doing great things. So we take a pause here. You might say, this is a lot of sharing with somebody who's not on your actual team. There's private channels, they're privy to ins and outs of daily work frustrations. I'm afraid this might backfire, which leads us to our third point. Most important part, probably, you need to build a foundation of trust. Without that trust there, trust that you both really are going for these shared goals, trust that they're a part of your team and trying to do the same things as you, none of this will work. So, what is trust? in the workplace. Trust is something we can talk a lot about in a lot of different ways, but in the workplace, I kind of think trust boils down to these three things. Number one is just the expertise. You believe your teammate knows what they're doing with their skills and their experience, often in a different area than you. Two is authenticity. I believe my teammate will do this when he says that he will. And reliability. Three, I believe that when I need help, I can ask for it and I'll get it. You know, Basically, the summary of this is you need to be able to believe that your teammates will follow through when they say they'll do something and do it as best as they can at that moment. That's really all it is that you need for this. But how do you build this trust? Trust is hard. There are entire books written on it and careers dedicated to it. But for me, there's kind of a couple simple ways you can do this. And number one is just be trustworthy. To build trust, be trustworthy, model the behavior that you want to see. And that looks like things like making realistic deadlines and telling people what the realistic promises are that you can keep. Be honest about your capacity, because the failure mode here is that it's very easy to mistake carelessness for malice or ill will when you don't know somebody, which is why that earlier team building is important and why that trust is important. And really make it clear how you can help each other and offer your aid. And the flip side of that, like make it clear probably what you don't really want to do. Talk candidly about your skill set and your interests. I personally believe in transparency being the best option, not the least just because it's easiest, but because it's something that I think it'll enable both of you to get what you really want. And hopefully you know what you're good at and what you like doing. If you don't, I suggest sitting down, thinking back on what you got excited to do that previous week or what really felt satisfied about doing. Or if it's too hard to do retrospectively, take a week and during that week, jot down the things that you are doing right away that you want to do at the beginning of your day, you're kicking to the top of your to-do list. And also keep track of the things that keep staying on your to-do list day after day, possibly week after week, and identifying what they are. Once you know this, you can share with your teammates. And an example of this, just between me and one of my teammates, is that because I come from marketing and because I come from event management, I'm really good at project management. I'm really good at like communications and empathy. Whereas they're really good at things like technical knowledge, educational content, also empathy. So in our cases, I handle a lot of the logistics and the copy of events and launches because that's what I live and breathe. And I can take that burden off of DA, who happens to, maybe hate doing that kind of project management. But I'm not an educator or an engineer by trade, so our advocates come up with great ideas for content and really step-by-step ways to present that in an educational format. And that way we can work together to figure out how to carry that through to the right eyes. So to recap, you should work together because you actually share those goals and recognition is step one of that. And number two is actually aligning them. And you can work well together with an embedded model where you get team building and you're building a foundation of trust, which of course takes us to the last part, which is what this looks like in practice. Because we've checked off the what and the why, let's see what this actually looks like. So let's use this example project we have of a Dev Foundations video series. This is basically a developer foundations video series that we created through most of this year, and I think a little bit of last year, where we had 7 different playlists for each of our official client libraries. So Ruby, Python, PHP, Node, Go, Java, and .NET that you see there. And within each of those language playlists, we had 9 basic topics that you need to know to get started when using a Stripe client library. So already looking at this, you can see this is a lot of work. So how did we kind of come together to make sure that this is going to have a good launch plan, which really is making sure it's getting in front of the right people at the right time? So you've got teamwork, you've got trust, you've got your shared goals. How do we make this happen? Number 1, start early. Number 2, make sure your goals are clear. Number 3, communicate. And you'll see that these are all things that are building on the teamwork, the trust, and all of that you've already built up. So starting early, work closely with your teammates from the planning stage. And this is what it looked like for us. From step 1 of having this, this idea, is to do a video series on basic topics to get started with our client libraries. The teammate who is working on this is actually taught at the App Academy, has a background in education. I trust that he knows the right things that you need to know to get started. And he already has a list of the basic topics. We have a sense this is a good idea, but how can we confirm it? So let's remember, number one in marketing is to know our users and their needs. So that means that I have access to user research. Sometimes we might have done market research or user experience research. We have our data in this particular case on our integration experience. And so we can actually validate, I can give you the supporting evidence to say, yes, we know without a doubt that junior developers are struggling more with this integration, both kind of from reported integration experience and also from support ticket stacks, which means we can combine our technical knowledge with our user research to create great developer advocacy that's serving our users. I want to point out that this can happen in the opposite direction too. Ideas can come from both sides, either direction. The most important thing is you trust that somebody is coming with a good idea for the user's benefit rather than goals that you might not believe in. So trusting in those shared goals. Second part of this is that making sure you clarify your audience and your impact for go-to-market or launch. So I'll give a little example of this. Before we even start any work, all of our dev advocates fill out a checklist for anything that they're doing, whether it's a live stream, it's a video, it's a blog post, with a couple key questions. And two of the most important ones I'm pulling out is who is this content for and how will this content help your teammates? I'm going to go into a little bit of detail why those two questions are most important, but in case we don't know, what is a go-to-market plan? What is GTM? Why do you even need one? A go-to-market plan in its simplest form just encompasses audience, who is it for? Messaging, what do you want to tell them about it? Channels, how you're going to tell them about it? And timing, when are you going to tell them about it? That's basically it to make sure that you can get whatever work you're doing out to the maximum number of appropriate people at the right time. So let's come back to these questions. Who is this content for? Thinking this through, let's think. Is a primer on client libraries going to be helpful to a medium or senior experienced developer? Probably not. So this is meant for our junior developers. Once we have that down, think about, can we get more specific than that? Maybe what stage of junior developer, at which point in their life cycle with you are they at? And these stages or segmentation are things that marketing people can help you out with. In our case, if you're trying to learn our client libraries, you're probably just beginning to integrate with Stripe. You could potentially maybe also do further segmentation about which product they might be using, specific use cases. But in this particular case, we don't need any of that because this is very broad knowledge that's applicable across all use cases and products. So we've got that nailed down. How will this content help your teammates? Let's consider this question. This is phrased this way to really nail down the impact and then the likely conclusions from that. I stay away from the word goal for like, what is the goal of this content? Because goal is a very vague term. You can have the goal for the person watching, you can have the goal for the company, you could have a metric. What I really want here is what's going to make that happen. So if you think about your teammates, you got product engineering, you got support team people, you got docs team. In this case, how we're really trying to help my teammate over there who sits on the support team is they want to decrease support tickets from confused junior developers. You take that, draw out the next assumption is if you have fewer support tickets from confused junior developers, hopefully that means you have fewer confused junior developers. And from that, fewer confused devs means hopefully that they will be able to complete their integration and there will thus be greater adoption of your product. Having this clear audience and impact means you'll have a much clearer path for when it comes to both who you're targeting when you're promoting and talking about the success of your work, like I mentioned earlier, so everybody else in the company can understand what you're trying to do. And I want to emphasize that this is something that's often very difficult for DevRel teams, as it's always how do you measure success when something is based in something like relationships that's very intangible, and this is one of those specific ways. So if we remember, let's think about the go-to-market plan for this series of content and what we need in it. We're able to actually fill most of this out. You can see that our dev marketer can easily slot in who our audience is, junior devs who are just beginning to integrate with Stripe, what we want to tell them. It's easy to get started with Stripe using our client libraries. We know our channels because we know all the ways that we're talking with our devs. That's literally all channels means. And then one thing is just that we have all these channels and Would we be using all of these channels in every piece of content? Like, would we push an API update out to all of these different things? Possibly not, but that's a decision your marketer can help you scope out. And in this case, this Dev Foundations video series is a big deal. So we're actually going to use all of these. And timing, the last thing, let's talk about this one. You could throw an arbitrary date in there. You could say we need to do it by this date for this particular reason. But what you're actually ideally doing is keeping an open exchange of information throughout the process. And in practice, this looks like things like transparent project management. This is a good practice to have in any teamwork situation while the work is going on, partially so you can know if deadlines will be hit, but also so that you can talk through unexpected challenges together, which of course requires trust. In this case, as a reminder, we've got 9 topics, we've got 7 languages. The way that we originally had this work going was we had each DA owning one topic, so something like authentication, across all 7 languages for easier recording. So we originally promoted these videos by topic because everybody was working at different paces. However, that doesn't really make sense for most users. Why would anybody want to learn about authentication in 7 different languages? If you're trying to get started with a Ruby client library, you want a playlist that's complete with everything you need to know, not a bunch of different playlists that all have 5 topics in them. They need to know about all the things that we're going to teach them. So as we talk this through, we went back to the drawing board and we thought about, okay, how can we do what makes the most sense for our users? So we came up with a new plan. Even though it would mean a slower output of information because all of our DAs are working at different paces, we talked through that trade-off and decided it would make sense, much more sense, to organize and promote these by language. And the biggest marketing lesson that I want you to take away here, if you remember nothing else from this whole talk, is that your workflow should not equal your promotional flow. Ship what makes sense for your developers, not what you finished. Even though I know you're very excited about what you've done, you want to get it out there, you think about what makes sense for your users as a whole. And us talking it through allowed us to really realize what would be best for our users and what was worth this trade-off of a slower output of video content. So coming back to our go-to-market plan, we've got our audience, we've got our messaging, we've got channels, we've got timing. We've ticked off all of these things. We've been working close together from the very beginning to the very end. And so this was our end product. We created 63 videos on 7 languages, 9 topics, which to this date have helped tens of thousands of devs get started on Stripe. I have to tell you here to go subscribe to Stripe Developers on YouTube. And actually, if you're interested in some more behind the scenes of how we pulled this off and some time-saving techniques, you can check out our blog on dev.to. So, in summary, as long as you make sure you have the same goals, you've built a team, you're embedded on a foundation of trust, you can increase your community reach together. Thank you for having me at DevRelCon Tokyo. A requisite plug here is that we are hiring DAs in all regions, including APAC. Please feel free to reach out to me about any open roles or any questions or comments after the talk. We'll have the slides and be sharing them with the conference. Thank you again, and I think I'm turning it back over to the MC.
Hi, thank you, Carol. Yeah, thank you for your great sessions.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
me.
right. I very strongly understand that that importance for the crop writing, the marketing, and the advocacy. Because of the till the end of last year, that I used to be working as a developer advocate at IBM, and also that I sometimes have the collaboration with the marketing team, and it's very hard to collaborate in between the marketing team and the advocacy team. Then we have the different KPIs, right? So
Yes,
right,
I think it's very
yeah, yeah,
hard.
yeah. It was really very understand this, yeah. And we have the one question for you via right. Oh, thank you for putting the comments. To reduce silos, I understand you use Marco Polo as a tool for video communication for coffee talks. What tool do you also work within your company to share progress on your work to reduce silos?
That is a
Yeah,
great
how about you?
question. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, and it is going to differ a lot based on your company culture too.
Mhm,
When I worked at MongoDB, we're very big on Jira, and Jira was kind of what we used for everything. At Stripe, we kind of use a variety of different tools, so that one
mhm,
is there's almost always a Google spreadsheet for everything that you're tracking.
mhm,
Ideally, somebody's is helping you do this for project management. The other thing that we do that I almost had a screenshot of there was we use our Kanban boards on GitHub. So that way people can very easily see at a glance where something is in its progress,
mhm,
especially for things like videos where it's a fairly waterfall process. Are they being script being created right now? Are they being edited? Are they getting ready to go live? Just to see things like that. And this is also built into things like our daily stand-ups that everybody
mhm,
writes at this point. And hopefully you actually go in and mark an emoji to say that you've read each person's.
mhm,
And other than that, it's any kind of project management tool that you can use and keep that at a link that people can find,
mhm.
like Google. Ooh, sorry, Google Tables is in beta in the US, but it's not available outside of the US. Anything else like that, keep it in a place that people can find. And I think that's the most important part so that you don't have to keep answering questions with
Mhm.
other people about what's going on.
I see. Yeah, it's cool. So, uh, the who decided the any kind of tools your company employed should be used, yeah, should use for mm, improving your work. The who decided to who decide what kind of tools you guys should use?
That's a great question. I think there could probably be more direction from above on what we're using right now
Mm-hmm,
because Stripe is a startup and we move very quickly. It differs a lot by org, to be honest.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Non-technical teams are often using Google Sheets a ton. More technical teams
Yeah.
might use GitHub a little bit more. Honestly, a lot, it's probably about half like security reasons what we can and
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
use,
yeah.
and
Right,
it's
right.
whoever the most organized person is. So if you're the most organized person and you can put it
Uh-huh.
into something, other people I can guarantee you will copy whatever template you have set up.
Yeah, right, right. I see. So yeah, I wanted to ask you that's right. Your answer. So there's lots of company have the any regulations to use the any tools such as open source software or
Yeah.
some free tools or something like that. So it's hard to decide. If we use the for example if we use the Slack, it's but
Mhm.
don't use Slack for free. Yeah, need
Mhm.
to get the enterprise license sometimes. So yeah, but I like the startup culture, the pro um, lightweight talks to decide something more
Mhm.
than the huge company such
Yes.
as mm, yeah, right,
Such as bigger
yeah,
companies.
yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
and I mean,
mhm,
even at Stripe, this is because this is something I care a lot about. I
yeah,
push very strongly for a
mhm,
project management tool
yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah,
know that as we grow, it's not going
mhm,
to work what we're doing now when we get to,
yeah,
5,000 people or whatever.
mhm. Okay, I see. Thank you. And we get one more question. Yeah, how do you think about effect of forum? I feel so many developers will ask a forum before leading documentation, so we have to answer so many times some questions, same questions. Sorry.
That's fair. I mean, that is something that happens. It's always just like, are they reading the docs or not? I think one of
Mm-hmm,
the very lucky things about Stripe is that our docs have a very good reputation. So people
mm-hmm,
do often know to go there. But when you're stuck or when you can't figure out where to go, it's good to have a forum for that. Stripe was kind of using IRC. I think we might be thinking about something else kind of with what's going on with Freenode and everything. But essentially, I think from a community perspective, so now I'm answering this very much just from my community marketing perspective. The more people you have out in the community who are developers that can help answer these questions, the less of a burden it will be on you. So ideally, you can leverage that community. The other thing is also just things like bots that maybe can pop up and tell them, is this what you're looking for? I mean, it's a challenge, right? You write all these beautiful docs and you feel like nobody reads them, but hopefully, I guess what you're not seeing is all the questions people didn't ask. So there's a trade-off there.
I see. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Carol. You had a great session. Therefore, us, I believe that your session is very helpful for all of audiences involved in the developer marketing, developer advocacy, both. I believe that the for audiences, if you have any more questions for Carol, please post to Twitter or Orbis chat. That was hashtag the for Carol. I think the Carol will answer your questions after
Yes,
that.
please,
Right.
please feel free to reach out on Twitter. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again, Carol. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.